Hello guys, tonight we're starting with a classic disaster story, the 10 Plagues of Egypt. For those who don't know, it's in the book of Exodus in the Bible, and it's so famous that even many who haven't opened the Bible remember a few of the main points. First, a small request. If you like the video, please like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy it. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time is it where you are? I'm always amazed at how far these stories reach. Now dim the lights a little, turn on the fan to make that soft humming sound, and sit back and relax. Let's enjoy today's mystery together. Long ago, when historians, archaeologists, and scientists didn't argue about environmental disasters, this was the only story. And it's not a subtle one. The sequence of the 10 plagues in Exodus is one of the most dramatic in the Bible. The Nile River turning to blood, the frog infestation, the swarms of insects, the death of livestock, 3 days of darkness, and finally the death of the firstborn son, which finally broke Pharaoh. The story begins when Moses tells Pharaoh straight out, "Let the Israelites go." Pharaoh doesn't agree, and that refusal proves to be a terrible mistake for him. Because from then on, one disaster after another, as if Egypt were no longer a superpower of the ancient world, but the setting of a bad nature documentary. First plague, the Nile River turns to blood. The Nile wasn't just a river for the Egyptians, it was the lifeline of their entire civilization. Water, irrigation, fish, transport, trade, everything. Suddenly the river is inedible, fish are floating dead, the whole country is in a bad state. Then frogs, millions of frogs. In the house, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, even in the oven. Like a plumbing disaster in the Bible version. When the frogs die, the body begins to rot. Then swarms of insects and spiders, gannets, flies. Then cattle start dying, people get boils. The sky joins in, terrible hailstorms destroy crops. Then locusts come and eat what's left. At one point, the entire country is dark for 3 days. This is nothing more than a full-scale environmental crisis of ancient times. The last plague, the death of the firstborn. This breaks Pharaoh and the Exodus begins. For thousands of years, believers have interpreted this as divine intervention. But modern historians and scientists say, so many disasters in such a beautiful sequence, isn't that suspicious? Maybe it's a memory of a real event, if not a miracle, then a chain reaction of catastrophes, which ancient people explained in their own words. But finding proof is a problem. It seems like the Egyptians wrote everything down, hieroglyphs in temples, records on papyrus, but they wrote about victories, buildings, praise of the gods. Failures, disasters, national embarrassments, never. That was propaganda, not real history. So if something like that had happened, they wouldn't have written it down. The proof has to be found elsewhere, indirect clues, environmental evidence, or any text that mentions chaos. Here comes the famous Papyrus of Ipuwer, or Admonitions of Ipuwer. This is an ancient Egyptian text which describes the utter anarchy in the land. The social order has collapsed, the poor have risen, death is rampant. And one line surprises everyone, the river is blood. This raises eyebrows among historians. It doesn't prove that the Exodus happened, but it does show that the Egyptians remembered some terrible times. Rivers of blood, it could be a metaphor for chaos, but the similarity is uncanny. The text is difficult to date exactly, but it suggests that ancient Egypt had memories of such turmoil. Now if we look for a natural explanation, it starts with the Nile River. If the river is bad, the whole of Egypt is bad. First plague, turning red like blood. Not actually blood, but it can be red. One possible cause, harmful algal bloom like red tide. Some algae grow, turn the water red-brown, release toxins. Fish die, the water stinks and becomes inedible. To ancient people, this would have sounded terrifying. The river has turned to blood. Then the cascade begins. When the fish die, oxygen decreases and frogs flee the river. The second plague is the frog infestation. Frogs live in water and are sensitive to toxins. When the water is bad, they come up to the ground and enter houses. This is also seen in modern disasters. But frogs don't live long outside of water, so they start to die, their bodies rot. And insects don't just annoy, they spread disease. Here's the whole thing, part 1 plus part 2 together in a long version. And insects don't just annoy, they spread disease. Flies, mosquitoes, gnats, they carry bacteria and parasites from animal carcasses to livestock, crops and people. In densely populated countries like Egypt, where people and animals live together, share water, and sanitation is at its worst, disease outbreaks can occur. Modern epidemiology shows how quickly insect-borne diseases spread in such environments. The biblical sequence seems to follow this pattern. Swarms of insects, right arrow infection in livestock, then boils on humans. This is not a separate punishment, but a biological chain reaction. First, the insects spread disease, then the entire agricultural system collapses. After the insects comes the death of livestock. The Bible says horses, donkeys, camels, cows, sheep, goats, all over Egypt die in huge numbers. This is not just a tragedy, but the collapse of the entire economy. In ancient Egypt, animals were multipurpose tools: food, milk, meat, transport, power for farming, plowing, fertilizer, skin, wool, even a symbol of wealth. When they suddenly die, food production stops, trade suffers, farmers lose their plowing animals. The whole society falls into crisis. What could be the reason for this? Clues from previous plagues: rotting corpses plus insect explosions, right arrow, easy spread of bacteria, viruses. A popular theory is anthrax. Anthrax. It lives in the soil and is eaten by grazing animals, cattle, sheep. Insects carry it from infected animals to others. Anthrax is very aggressive. Healthy animals die within hours or days without any warning. To ancient people, it seemed mysterious and terrifying. What's going on? Some invisible force. The ripple effect of animal deaths is huge. Farming stops, milk and meat production drops, food shortages, trade stops. And some diseases, such as the cutaneous form of anthrax, can also spread from animals to humans. Then comes the boil, painful, pus-filled sores on humans and animals. At first, it seems like a separate medical mystery, but it fits perfectly into the pattern of ecosystem stress. Swarms of insects, flies, mosquitoes, gnats transfer bacteria from infected animals to humans. Anthrax or other bacterial infections, such as glanders, cause serious skin lesions, from small sores to black, painful ulcers. To the ancients, who had no idea about bacteria, this seemed inexplicably terrifying. Imagine the river is already bad, animals are dying on farms, insects are flying in the sky, and now sores are breaking out on people. This is no longer a random event. It's as if all of nature has rebelled. Psychologically, it has a huge impact. In ancient societies, when people saw such crises one after another, they thought it was the anger of God or the gods. The Egyptians saw a connection between rivers, nature, and crops with their gods. When these things happened, it felt like their gods had abandoned them. But the disaster does not stop. After the animal and human diseases comes the seventh plague, terrible storms. Lightning, hail, so intense that crops are destroyed, trees fall, and animals and people outside die. Egypt's climate is hot and dry. Hailstorms are very rare in the Nile Valley. So if any extreme weather pattern, such as a supercell storm, occurs, it would seem extraordinary and terrifying. Modern meteorology shows that in Egypt, especially in the Delta area, when there is a sharp temperature gradient, hailstorms occur, although rare in late spring or early fall. In ancient times, if any climate change or volcanic ash, such as from Santorini, influences, then such intense storms are possible. This storm destroyed the crops, further damaging an already weak agriculture. Then came the eighth plague, swarms of locusts, which devoured what was left. And insects don't just annoy, they spread disease. Flies, mosquitoes, gnats, they carry bacteria and parasites from animal carcasses to livestock, crops, and humans. In densely populated countries like Egypt, where people and animals live together, share water, and sanitation is poor, disease outbreaks can occur. Modern epidemiology shows how quickly insect-borne diseases spread in such environments. Thousands of people can be affected within days. The biblical sequence seems to follow this pattern. Swarms of insects utter an infection in livestock, then boils on humans. This is not a separate punishment, but a biological chain reaction. First, the insects spread disease, then the entire agricultural system collapses. After the insects comes the death of livestock. The Bible says horses, donkeys, camels, cows, sheep, goats, all over Egypt die in huge numbers. This is not just a tragedy, but the collapse of the entire economy. In ancient Egypt, animals were multipurpose tools: food, milk, meat, transport, power for farming, ploughing, fertilizer, skin, wool, even a symbol of wealth. When they suddenly die, food production stops, trade suffers, farmers lose their ploughing animals. The whole society falls into crisis. What could be the reason for this? Clues from previous plagues. Rotting corpses plus insect explosions utter an easy spread of bacteria viruses. A popular theory is anthrax. It lives in the soil and is eaten by grazing animals, cattle, sheep. Insects carry it from infected animals to others. Anthrax is very aggressive. Healthy animals die within hours or days without any warning. To ancient people it seemed mysterious and terrifying. What's going on? Some invisible force. The ripple effect of animal deaths is huge. Farming stops, milk and meat production drops, food shortages, trade stops. And some diseases, such as the cutaneous form of anthrax, can also spread from animals to humans. Then comes the boil, painful, pus-filled sores on humans and animals. At first it seems like a separate medical mystery, but it fits perfectly into the pattern of ecosystem stress. Swarms of insects, flies, mosquitoes, gnats transfer bacteria from infected animals to humans. Anthrax or other bacterial infections, such as glanders, cause serious skin lesions, from small sores to black, painful ulcers. To the ancients, who had no idea about bacteria, this seemed inexplicably terrifying. Imagine the river is already bad, animals are dying on farms, insects are flying in the sky, and now sores are breaking out on people. This is no longer a random event. It's as if all of nature has rebelled. Psychologically, it has a huge impact. In ancient societies, when people saw such crises one after another, they thought it was the anger of God or the gods. The Egyptians saw a connection between rivers, nature, and crops with their gods. When these things happened, it felt like their gods had abandoned them. The disaster does not stop. After the animal and human diseases comes the seventh plague, terrible storms. Thunder, lightning, hail so intense that crops are destroyed, trees fall, and animals and people outside die. Egypt's climate is hot and dry. Hailstorms are very rare in the Nile Valley. But if warm air rises rapidly from the ground and mixes with cold air, then massive storm clouds are formed. Water droplets in the tundra repeatedly rise and fall, freeze to ice, and grow. Finally, heavy hail falls. If such a storm hits an already vulnerable agricultural area, the consequences are serious. Crops that had survived disease and environmental disruption are suddenly destroyed. Trees are uprooted, fields flattened. In ancient societies that depended on early harvests, such a storm can cause food shortages overnight. But the Bible says it gets worse. After a hailstorm, the land becomes vulnerable. The remaining crops are damaged, and the damaged crops attract a special visitor, locusts. Locust swarms are one of the most destructive natural events in agricultural history. A large swarm can contain billions of insects, traveling thousands of kilometers in search of food. When they land, they eat everything: leaves, stems, grains, even tree bark. Modern swarms are seen in Africa and the Middle East, destroying farms in a matter of hours. If Egypt is already suffering from ecological collapse, disease, and storm-damaged crops, the arrival of locusts would be a catastrophe. Food supplies would almost completely disappear. Locusts are not ordinary grasshoppers. Under certain conditions, such as overpopulation, drought followed by rain, they go into a gregarious phase, gather in large groups forming swarms. Tens of billions of insects, the sky turns black, the sun is covered. Ancient texts say the sun is darkened by swarms of locusts. Imagine, standing in your field, the sky is filled with insects. Then they land. In a few hours, the year's harvest is gone. Grain, vegetables, fruit trees, everything. Famine conditions immediately. Now Egypt is no longer facing a disaster. It is a cascade failure. One crisis triggers another. Rivers fail, animals die, diseases spread, storms destroy crops, locusts eat the rest. Then comes the 9th plague, 3 days of darkness. The Bible says, such a thick darkness that people can't see each other, can't leave their homes. Such long-lasting darkness is not normal in the Nile Valley. Scientists have offered a few possible explanations. One big theory: volcanic eruption. Around the time of the Exodus, according to many scholars, 1600–1500 BCE, a massive eruption occurred on the island of Santorini, one of the largest in human history. Ash and debris rose into the atmosphere and spread across the eastern Mediterranean. Ash clouds blocked sunlight. The sky became dark, hazy, and misty, even in distant areas. To ancient people, the sun seemed to disappear. Another possibility: sandstorm or Khamsin wind. In Egypt, a desert storm creates dust clouds. The sky becomes dark. Visibility is zero. Breathing is hard. In extreme cases, people stay indoors. If such darkness came after other disasters, crops failed, animals died, insects swarmed, diseases spread, then people would think the entire natural world was against them. But the last plague is even more haunting: the death of the firstborn. In one night, the firstborn of every Egyptian household dies. The plague spreads. This breaks Pharaoh, letting the Israelites go. This is the most difficult to explain. The previous ones can be connected by ecological chains, but this, some researchers say toxic grain crop damage after disaster, fungus if storage is poor, e.g. ergot grows, produces ergot toxin, serious illness or death. In famines, people depend on stored grain. In many households, the firstborn or head of the family eats more first, so they are the first affected. But there is no direct proof. It just shows how environmental disasters can create unusual illness patterns. Another view: this is symbolic storytelling. The death of the firstborn signifies the final collapse of the Pharaoh's power, the ultimate judgment. The earlier plagues may have been memories of real events, but the last one took shape through religious storytelling. The real mystery is not whether the plagues were literal or not. The real question: did ancient people leave behind a memory of some great catastrophe that has been retold, interpreted, and retold over thousands of years, becoming the story of today? When historians read Exodus, they often ask another question: is this story just religious, or is it just a fragmented memory of an ancient catastrophe? And this lack of evidence makes historians wary. There is no direct archaeological or written evidence that the plagues described in Exodus happened exactly as they did. But at the same time, that doesn't prove that the story is entirely fictional. There are many gaps in history, especially when the events involve disasters, social upheavals, or the downfall of powerful leaders who wanted their monuments to show victory, not embarrassment. And when plagues are looked at closely, an interesting pattern emerges. Many follow a very logical sequence. Polluted rivers, right arrow animals fleeing the water, right arrow dead animals, right arrow insect outbreak, right arrow disease, spread right arrow livestock deaths, plus human infection, right arrow storms, plus locusts, right arrow crop destruction, right arrow famine, plus chaos. It's like a chain reaction. One crisis triggers another. This doesn't prove that the plagues happened exactly as the Bible does. Ancient writers shaped the stories with meaning, morality, and theology. Generation after generation, real events were filled with symbolism and dramatic detail. But it does suggest that the stories may hold echoes of real experiences, memories of environmental disasters, political instability, social upheavals that ancient people couldn't understand. And when people want to explain uncontrollable, terrible events, they turn to the most powerful explanation they can find: divine intervention. For believers, plagues are powerful examples of faith and divine justice. For historians, they are a fascinating puzzle, a story in which fragments of real history are hidden beneath layers of storytelling. And this mystery is why, even after thousands of years, the plagues of Egypt capture our imagination. Because history does not always provide clear answers. Sometimes it leaves us with questions, and sometimes those questions outlive civilization. A pale April morning has descended on the docks of Southampton. The harbour is alive, but not with the sound of chaos. Rather, there is the sound of a steady, rhythmic departure. Porters shout instructions. Steam whistles blow over the water. Nearby, the masts of smaller ships are flapping their wings, shouting as if they disapprove of this huge new ship. You arrive in a carriage that stops next to the long wooden pier. As you open the door, the first thing you notice is the crowd. Not just passengers, families, reporters, dock workers, curious spectators who have come just to watch the departure of the world's largest ship. Then look up, and there she stands, the Titanic, rising above the harbor like a moving city that has decided to stop for a moment by the shore. The black hull is so long that it is almost unnoticeable. Above the hull is a gleaming white superstructure, countless windows and rows of promenades. And above all, 4 huge funnels, warm buff and black, quietly spewing smoke into the morning sky. There's no choice but to stare. Even the dock workers, who spend their entire lives around ships, sometimes look up as if they still can't believe it's real. A steward comes forward in a dark uniform. Tipping his hat, he checks your ticket. First class. Immediately, a porter comes to collect your luggage. He handles your trunks carefully, as if he knows they will soon be placed in a cabin like a room in a grand hotel, not on a ship crossing the Atlantic. You move toward the gangway. A small string quartet is playing nearby. Soft music wafts through the cool morning air. Not loud, just enough to give the moment an air of calm elegance. Ladies in wide-brimmed hats slowly make their way to the boarding ramp. Gentlemen in tailored coats pause to admire the ship, then board. As you reach the foot of the gangway, you realize this is not just a voyage. This is the beginning of an experience that people will talk about for the rest of their lives. You put one foot on the ramp. The most luxurious ship in the world awaits ahead. The atmosphere changes as soon as you step aboard. The Southampton docks behind are still loud and busy, shouting porters, curious people. But up ahead, inside the ship, everything is strangely quiet. The noise fades, replaced by a quiet order, as if ceremonial. The steward greeted me immediately, standing perfectly straight, in a dark uniform, white gloves folded behind his back. A warm, practiced smile spread across his face as he saw the first-class ticket. "Welcome aboard, sir. Your luggage has already disappeared below deck, carried by porters as if they know exactly where everything will go. Everything feels effortless, as if the ship itself has begun to take care of you." Follow the steward inside. The first corridor is surprising. It seems like a ship would be cramped, narrow, But here the hallway is wide, brightly lit, polished wood paneling on the walls, soft glow under the electric lights, thick carpets soft underfoot. Yes, electric lights. The Titanic already feels more like a floating grand hotel than a ship. The steward leads you to the heart of the ship. Stop as you turn a corner. The grand staircase rises through the decks like the centerpiece of a palace. Curved oak railings, delicate ironwork gleam in the warm light. A large glass dome above, pouring soft daylight into the room. Passengers stand nearby, admiring. Ladies whisper. Gentlemen raise their heads to study the carved wood and ornate decoration. Someone says quietly, "It feels like the lobby of a luxury hotel in Paris, not the inside of a ship." The steward waited patiently, as if he had seen this reaction many times. Steward pointed lightly with his hand toward the stairs. "Your suite is just upstairs, sir." You rise slowly, your hand gliding over the smooth oak railing. With each step, another glimpse of luxury. Velvet chairs against the wall, the warm glow from the brass lamp, the large clock standing on the landing, its curved figure crowning time with honor and glory. Everything is designed to impress, and it works. When you reach the next deck, you realize this voyage is not just about crossing the Atlantic. It is about being done in a world of comfort, elegance, and effortless luxury that very few people in the world are lucky enough to experience. At the top of the stairs, the steward leads you through a quiet corridor. Polished wood and thick carpets muffle even the sound of footsteps. The hallway doesn't feel like part of a ship, but rather the upper floor of an elegant hotel. Brass lamps cast a soft glow on the cream-colored walls, and the air smells faintly of fresh polish. The steward stopped in front of a door, unlocked with a small brass key. It opened smoothly. "Your suite, sir." You enter. At first you just stand there. This is not a cramped cabin. It is a private apartment. First the sitting room, upholstered chairs, writing desk, small table by the window. The furniture is polished mahogany, the cushions in soft fabric, as if it were in a fine London townhouse. Light pours in through the large porthole. Outside, Southampton Harbour is still busy. Tugboats slowly pass the giant hull. Dock workers walk along the pier. But from this room, everything seems distant and quiet. The luggage had already arrived. The porter had neatly placed the trunks next to the wardrobe. Through the second door was the bedroom, a comfortable bed, a thick mattress under crisp white sheets, designed for a proper night's sleep even when crossing the Atlantic. And the most surprising thing, a private bathroom. Small porcelain sink, polished fixtures, hot and cold running water. This would be unimaginable on other ships, but luxury was expected on the Titanic. You slowly look around the suite. The steward comes back to check that everything matches your expectations. He shows you the electric call button by the bed, service at the touch of a button. The heating system keeps the room warm even in the cold Atlantic wind. The evening's dinner schedule says, in the first-class dining salon, multiple courses, fine china, crystal glass, like the finest restaurants in London or Paris. The room is quiet again when the steward leaves. Look out the window, the dock is starting to shrink, the ship is preparing for departure. Sitting in the chair by the window, you get a strange feeling. This floating palace is your home for the next few days. Settling into the suite, curiosity draws you outside. Sitting in such a luxurious room feels like a waste. The entire floating city is waiting to be explored. Head to the promenade deck. The corridor gradually brightens, sunlight pouring in through the large windows. The steward opens a door. A breath of cool sea air welcomes you. Step outside. The promenade is like a long seaside boulevard along the side of a ship. The polished wooden planks are perfectly clean and smooth underfoot. The white railings separate it from the vast harbour. Southampton spreads out behind. From this height, the docks look small, like toys. Tugboats puff smoke next to the Titanic's hull, the crowd still standing on the pier, watching the departure of the great liner. The passengers walk leisurely. ladies in elegant dresses, arm in arm, wide hats with ribbons and feathers. Gentlemen in tailored coats, polished shoes, walk with relaxed confidence, as if they know they are on the most luxurious ship in the world. Deck chairs arranged along the railing, thick blankets folded, for those who want to enjoy the ocean air. You lean lightly on the rail. The ship is so large that movement is almost unnoticeable. Only the view of the harbor slowly shifts, indicating that the Titanic is waking up. Deep vibrations hum from below deck. The engine has come to life. Not loud, just a gentle pulse underfoot, like the heartbeat of some vast mechanical creature. Nearby, a small group of musicians begins to play softly. The music floats onto the deck, blending with the distant sounds of the harbor. The moment feels ceremonial, as if departure is not just a journey, but an event worthy of quiet celebration. Passengers stop to watch. Some wave to friends and family standing on the dock. Others stand silently admiring the scale of the ship. The shoreline slowly recedes. The buildings get smaller. The piers disappear. And as the Titanic glides into the open water, there is an extraordinary feeling. You are no longer in a harbor. You are standing on the deck of the world's most magnificent ship, setting sail for the vast Atlantic. As dusk falls, the Titanic settles into a gentle rhythm with open sails. The coast of England disappears behind the horizon, leaving only the Atlantic spread out on all sides. The steward gives a polite reminder in your suite. Dinner will be served soon. You dress carefully. First-class dining is not casual. Gentlemen in evening coats, polished shoes, ladies in elegant gowns, shimmering in electric lights. The atmosphere feels like a grand social event even before you reach the dining room. Down the stairs again, the ship is alive with quiet activity. Passengers are passing through the corridors, exchanging greetings. Faint music drifts in the distance. Arrive at the entrance of the first-class dining salon. Two stewards stand by the door, getting guests to their assigned tables. As you enter, the size of the room overwhelms you. A vast area, high ceilings supported by elegant columns, soft white paint. Electric lights glow overhead, reflecting off polished silverware and crystal glasses. White linen on all tables. Quiet conversation in the room, the gentle clink of china, the skillful movements of the waiters. You are shown to your seat. Almost immediately, the waiter brings the first course. The meal is elaborate, fresh oysters, rich soup, perfect fish, roasted meat. Each course is served on fine china with the emblem of the White Star Line. Wine is poured into crystal glasses. Conversation flows. Businessmen talk about investments. Aristocrats tell stories of London and Paris. Travelers to New York share plans. It's easy to forget you're 1,000 miles from land. The room is designed to create the illusion of stability, elegance, and comfort. Course after course, each more impressive than the last. As the last plate is cleared, dessert arrives in the glow of electric chandeliers. One thought can't be avoided. No ship in history has offered such an experience. Dinner slowly ends. The waiters move quietly between the tables like dancers. One by one, the guests get up, adjust their coats and gowns, continue their conversation, and then go out. But the evening is not over yet. The steward suggests the first-class lounge. Follow the flow of passengers down the corridor. Another remarkable room. The lounge is warm and inviting, not for spectacle, but for comfort and conversation. Large windows line the walls, and outside is only darkness. The Atlantic stretches across the darkness, nothing to be seen but the glimmer of moonlight. Inside, the atmosphere is lively, comfortable armchairs and small tables. Gentlemen talk about business ventures and politics. Ladies cluster close together, chatting about London society and the upcoming season in New York. A pianist plays softly in the corner, calm, elegant music, a perfect match for the quiet luxury of the room. Time slows down when mixed with the murmur of conversation. The steward offers drinks, crystal glasses, fine wines and spirits on silver trays. Cigars are available in the smoking area. You settle into a deep chair. The upholstery is thick and comfortable. The warmth of the room is a pleasant contrast to the cool air of the promenade deck. The passengers are perfectly at ease. The reason is clear. The Titanic was designed to remove all the inconveniences of ocean travel. No rocking discomfort, no cramped quarters, no sense of danger, just quiet elegance. Across the room, a group begins to talk about the ship. The engineering is admired. Some confidently mention the Titanic's advanced safety features. Many repeat the same phrase, "The ship is practically unsinkable." The idea spreads through the room like a comforting certainty. So big, steel construction, modern design, what danger could come? The pianist continues to play. The evening progresses peacefully. No one in the lounge can imagine that history will soon tragically color these confident wards. Finally, the lounge quiets down. Some go back to their suites. Some go to the smoking room or stay in the conversation. But you are drawn to the open air. Go down the corridor to the promenade deck. As you open the door, the cool Atlantic night greets you, an immediate change from the warmth of the interior. Fresh breezes blow across the bridge deck, carrying the clean scent of the ocean. The sounds of the ship's interior fade, replaced by the steady swish of water past the hull. Night has fallen completely. The sky above is filled with stars, so bright and numerous that it seems like an aureole. Far from the city lights, heaven clearly reveals itself. The Milky Way is like a faint glowing band, countless stars shimmering like scattered diamonds. The sea below reflects that silence. You walk slowly along the deck. There are very few passengers outside now. A couple leans on the railing, talking softly. Farther away, a gentleman sits alone in a deck chair, wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the sky. The Titanic moves forward with calm confidence. The deep, steady vibration of the engine below deck, very light, but reassuring in rhythm. Every few seconds the bow cuts through the water, sending soft ripples across the dark Atlantic. You put your hand on the railing. From here the enormity of the ship is clear. The promenade stretches far forward and aft, disappearing in the shadow of the electric deck lamps. The sea breaks gently near the bow ahead, the Titanic moving through the vast ocean. It feels peaceful. The ship seems overwhelming with its enormous size, its modern engineering. It moves through the water with a quiet strength that gives complete confidence. Passengers often say the same thing: this ship is the greatest achievement of modern travel. You stand for a few minutes, breathe the cold ocean air, watch the stars slowly drift across the sky. Finally, return to the warmth of the ship. Tomorrow awaits another day, comfort, exploration, luxury, aboard the world's most magnificent liner. And tonight the Atlantic feels calm, boundless, and perfectly safe. Morning comes quietly on the Titanic. You wake up slowly, first noticing the gentle stillness of the room. There is no harsh rocking, no sudden noise that would remind you that you are far out at sea. Instead, the ship moves so smoothly that it feels like you are sleeping in a grand hotel, just gliding over the ocean. A soft knock on the door. The steward enters politely, carrying a breakfast tray. Silver dishes are arranged, steam rises from a pot of fresh tea, toast, eggs, fruit, the same careful attention as last night's dinner. Breakfast here also feels luxurious. You thank me, open the curtains after the steward has left. Sunlight streams into the suite. Outside, the Atlantic spreads out in all directions, the water calm, rolling gently under the pale morning sky. There is no land, only a faint white wake behind the Titanic. The ship is steadily moving west. You dress and step out into the corridor. The ship is already alive with activity. The first-class passengers are moving about with relaxed confidence, as if they have become completely familiar with this floating palace overnight. Some are going to the dining salon for breakfast, some to the promenade deck to enjoy the fresh morning air. You follow them out. The sunlight transforms the ship. The quiet elegance of yesterday is brighter, more lively. Deck chairs line the railings, many occupied passengers reading newspapers or sipping coffee, comfortably wrapped in blankets. The sea sparkles in the distance. A steward carries a tray of warm drinks. Nearby, a group is talking about the Titanic's remarkable speed. Despite its enormous size, it crosses the Atlantic with impressive efficiency, but there is no rush. Passengers walk slowly, enjoying the ship's peaceful rhythm. Some are telling stories of European ports, others are sharing the excitement of arriving in New York in a few days. Everything seems safe, controlled, perfectly planned. The Titanic is moving forward with quiet power. Standing in the morning sunlight, in comfort and calm, it is hard to imagine that anything could interrupt such a magnificent voyage. The day passes in the gentle rhythm of the ship. The hours pass almost without notice. Passengers stroll the deck, read books in the lounges, gather for meals, which are more like elegant social events than simple necessities. As dusk falls, the Atlantic sky darkens again. After dinner, you return to the promenade, where the quiet beauty of the open ocean takes over at night. The air has cooled since morning, sharp edges on the bridge. The stewards have placed blankets on the deck chairs for those who want to linger under the stars. The ship moves forward with steady confidence. The quiet, powerful rhythm of the engine runs below. The faint but constant vibration underfoot, a reminder that the Titanic is crossing the vast ocean at remarkable speed. The sky above is perfectly clear. They are brighter than last night. There are no clouds or moonlight, so they glitter with a yearning sharpness. The ocean below reflects only darkness, a deep black expanse, all the way to the horizon. Passengers are moving calmly on the deck. Some are walking slowly, enjoying the fresh air before returning inside. Some are leaning on the railing and watching the sea glide past the hull. Laughter and conversation float in the cool night air. Faint music wafts from inside the ship. The Titanic seems invincible. The thought seems to float in the air. Its massive steel hull, advanced engineering, luxurious design, the pinnacle of human achievement. Many passengers boast that it is the safest vessel. But the ocean is vast and silent. You stand a little longer on the railing, watching the dark water rush past the bow. The night is peaceful, almost hypnotic. The ship is steadily moving across the Atlantic. Finally, return to the warm lights of the ship. Tomorrow is another day, comfort, conversation, elegance on the world's most famous liner. And as the Titanic sails west through the calm, star-filled night, no one can imagine how suddenly this perfect voyage will change. The year is 1920. Just a few years ago, the world was plunged into the darkest conflict in human history. The First World War had scarred continents, broken empires, and left an entire generation reeling. European cities were still being rebuilt. Millions of families were learning to live in the absence of their fathers, sons, and brothers. For a moment, it seemed as if the world might sink into an era of long exhaustion. But something unexpected happened. Instead of going into silence and action, society exploded with energy. Across America and Europe, people became frantic to live again. After years of rationing, fear, and discipline, the appetite for pleasure returned with incredible force. Restaurants filled up, music halls opened, dance floors came alive with laughter and movement. It was as if the world had collectively decided life is too short to waste. New technologies began to transform daily life. Automobiles grew out of factories, allowing ordinary people to travel farther than ever before. Radio came to the living room, bringing music and news directly to the home. Electric lights illuminated city streets into the night, turning cities into glowing landscapes of possibility. Wealth also grew at an astonishing speed. The stock market rose year after year, investors confident in a future of endless prosperity. Businessmen made fortunes in industries that had not existed 10 years earlier. Suddenly, there were more millionaires than ever before, and with wealth came extravagance. Grand hotels were filled with champagne and laughter. Lavish parties in private clubs lasted until sunrise. The upper classes dressed in silk and pearls, and orchestras played new energetic rhythms that encouraged people to dance without restraint. In many ways, the spirit of this new decade seemed familiar. Just 8 years earlier, the Titanic had been the pinnacle of luxury and the confidence of the modern world. That floating palace symbolized the belief in building a perfect future through progress and wealth. The 1920s carried that same spirit, but now it had spread throughout the city. The world was convinced that a brilliant new era had arrived, an era of glamour, music, endless celebration. Few people thought how long such a dazzling moment could last. As the 1920s gained momentum, the world's great cities began to transform. Places that had been quiet after sunset were now determined to stay awake all night. Electric lights spread from theaters, restaurants, and hotel lobbies, turning city streets into glowing rivers of movement and noise. New York is perhaps the most dramatic example. Broadway is ablaze with bright signs and crowded sidewalks. Taxi horns echo across Manhattan, crowds pour in and out of music halls, dance clubs, rooftop restaurants. The city has always been lively, but now it feels overwhelming. Paris is no different. Cafes line the sidewalks, artists, writers, musicians gather late into the night. Laughter mingles with the rhythm of jazz from the small clubs on the narrow streets. The city that survived war and hardship has suddenly regained its beauty and appetite for celebration. Berlin is also pulsating with life. The German capital is famous for its daring nightlife. Cabaret venues host bold, artistic, sometimes scandalous performances. Visitors say that when night falls in Berlin, society loosens its grip. The cities of the world have become stages, and people are eager to perform. Fashion quickly changed to match this new atmosphere. Men wore sleek suits and polished shoes, projecting the confidence of businessmen in a booming economy. Women abandoned heavy clothing and opted for lighter dresses, allowing them to move freely on the dance floor. Short haircuts became fashionable. A new generation of young women, often called flappers, embraced independence with striking confidence. They danced, smoked, and spoke openly, much to the shock of the older generation. Music filled the air. Jazz spread rapidly through clubs and theaters, with new rhythms that encouraged people to move with energy and spontaneity. Trumpets, pianos, saxophones replaced the previously restrained orchestra. Dancing became faster, louder, and more exciting. In many ways, the atmosphere of the 1920s was one of permanent celebration. The world had endured tragedy, now determined to make up for lost time. Every night seemed an opportunity for some extraordinary experience. Cities became playgrounds of light, music, and motion, and for those living through it, the future seemed brighter than ever. If cities in the 1920s had a heartbeat, it was jazz. Music seemed to come together everywhere, emanating from clubs, dance halls, radio, with a rhythm that seemed entirely new. Unlike the formal orchestras of previous generations, jazz had energy, a zest for improvisation, movement, spontaneity. Lively, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. In cities like New Orleans, Chicago, and New York, musicians broke the rules of traditional music and experimented with sound. Trumpets blared boldly. Saxophones weaved playful melodies in the air, pianos played bright chords, calling dancers to the floor. Jazz soon crossed the Atlantic. Paris quickly embraced it. European audiences were fascinated by jazz's vibrant style and emotional freedom. Nightclubs were packed with people. They wanted to hear the latest songs from American bands, which seemed to be playing with the pulse of life. The music changed people's behavior. Where the dance floor had once been slow and careful steps, there was now an explosion of movement. Couples swung, spun, in energetic dances like the Charleston and the Black Bottom. The rhythm encouraged laughter, experimentation, and sometimes reckless enthusiasm. The older generation looked on with concern. To them, jazz seemed chaotic and unruly. The music ignored the traditional structures of a decadent society. Some critics said it promoted moral decline, but young people loved it. To the new generation, jazz was a symbol of freedom, bold, exciting, full of possibility. The music captured the spirit of a decade that refused to live quietly. Jazz-dedicated clubs began to spring up in major cities. Dimly lit rooms, cigarette smoke, and glowing lamps, gathering places for musicians and audiences. Wealthy socialites, artists, writers, curious travelers, all united in the same hypnotic rhythm. Famous performers emerged. Louis Armstrong transformed the trumpet into a voice that soared above the orchestra with joyful confidence. Singers began to deliver lyrics with emotion and personality never heard before. Jazz was not just entertainment, it became the soundtrack to an entire era. The Roaring Twenties danced to its rhythms, celebrated its energy, and spread its bold spirit to every corner of modern life. As jazz spread through the cities of the 1920s, another unexpected feature was shaping nightlife: alcohol. In America, Prohibition was enacted in 1920, a national ban on the manufacture and sale of alcohol. The goal was to create a more disciplined, moral society. Many politicians believed that removing alcohol would reduce crime, strengthen families, and restore order to the city. But the opposite happened. Drinking didn't disappear, it just went underground. Secret bars began to spring up in cities like New York and Chicago, behind unmarked doors and hidden basements. They were called speakeasy, where customers had to whisper to avoid police attention. A visitor would walk down a dark alley, knock on an ordinary door. The small window would open, the guard would quietly ask for the password. Inside, nothing secretive, a lively, crowded place. A jazz band was playing energetic songs, guests were dancing in dim lights. The waiter was moving quickly with trays, mixing creative cocktails. With traditional spirits hard to come by, bartenders experimented with new recipes. They mixed gin, fruit juices, and syrups to create colorful drinks, hiding the rough taste of homemade alcohol. Cocktails became fashionable, turning drinking into an art form. The most famous speakeasies became legendary. Some were lavish clubs, hidden behind elegant restaurants. Some were small, smoky rooms where musicians played until sunrise. Wealthy businessmen, artists, socialites, all gathered, enjoying the thrill of breaking the law in stylish surroundings. Of course, the illegal alcohol trade attracted powerful criminals. Figures like Al Capone made huge fortunes supplying liquor. Organized crime expanded rapidly, making alcohol the most profitable business of the decade. But for many, speakeasy was a place to escape from reality. Behind that hidden door, the Roaring Twenties seemed overwhelming. The music played loudly, the cocktails flowed freely, and the night promised endless excitement. Jazz was echoing in the clubs, cocktails were flowing behind hidden doors. Then another Revolution Street and dance hall were quietly unfolding. The rise of a new kind of woman. For generations, society has expected women to behave with careful restraint. Fashion was heavy and modest. Hair was long, carefully styled. Social rules dictated how to speak, dress, and behave in public. But the young women of the 1920s had no interest in that tradition. They were flapper. The name itself suggested something light, rebellious, uncontrollable. Flappers rejected the rigid expectations of their parents' generation and embraced a lifestyle full of freedom, excitement, and independence. The change was immediately visible in fashion. Long skirts disappeared, short dresses came so that it was easier to move on the dance floor. Corsets, which restricted movement by holding the waist, were abandoned in favor of loose, comfortable clothing. Hair was cut into a short bob. It was a bold decision, one that shocked many older observers. For centuries, long hair had been a symbol of feminine beauty. Now young women were happily abandoning that tradition. Flappers also behaved differently. They danced enthusiastically to jazz, smoked cigarettes in public, and openly expressed their desire for independence. Many worked in offices, shops, and factories, earning their own income and gaining new personal freedom. This seemed alarming to the older generation. Newspapers published articles about moral decline and rebellious youth. Critics said the flapper lifestyle promoted recklessness and irresponsibility. But the change seemed exhilarating to women. They had been through the world wars, they had worked in factories and offices, while the men had gone off to fight. It seemed impossible to return to the quiet, restricted life of the pre-war period. The flapper symbolized something bigger than just fashion. She symbolized a new era, one where women were demanding a greater voice in society. Voting rights had expanded in many countries, and social expectations were slowly shifting. The Roaring Twenties were not just about jazz, wealth, and glittering parties. They were also about transformation, and the young women dancing on crowded floors were helping to reshape the modern world. Music was filling dance halls, flapper fashion was transforming, then another powerful force was shaping the decade: money. Wealth was magically multiplying in the 1920s. Business was expanding rapidly. Factories were producing goods at astonishing speed. New industries were springing up overnight. The automobile is at the center of this transformation. Henry Ford's assembly line had transformed manufacturing before the war, but now the system has reached its full potential. Cars are rolling out of factories in huge numbers, becoming affordable to millions of people who had never imagined they would. Roads have expanded into the countryside, connecting town and city more easily than ever before. Travel suddenly seems easy and exciting. Radio entered daily life. Families gathered around glowing wooden cabinets to listen to music, news, and entertainment. Advertisements encouraged people to buy new products, from refrigerators to stylish clothing. Consumption became part of the culture. People were encouraged to spend, to enjoy the rewards of modern industry. Department stores displayed elegant goods in brightly lit windows, tempting shoppers with the promise of comfort and sophistication. But the most powerful symbol of the new prosperity was the stock market. In cities like New York, investors rushed to buy shares of companies which they believed would grow endlessly. Stock prices were rising steadily. Newspapers reported stories of ordinary individuals who had become wealthy quickly by investing small amounts. The idea of easy money spread like wildfire. People who had never invested before suddenly opened brokerage accounts. Clerks, teachers, shopkeepers bought stocks with loans, confident that prices would continue to rise. The market became a national obsession. Crowds gathered outside brokerage offices to watch stock price updates on large boards. Conversations in restaurants and taxis turned to the same subject: which company was climbing the fastest. Many Americans saw a golden opportunity. The economy seemed unstoppable. Factories were producing goods faster. Cities were getting richer. Luxurious lifestyles were becoming common among those benefiting from the boom. But beneath the excitement was a fragile truth. This wealth depended heavily on confidence. As long as people believed that markets would rise forever, the prosperity of the Roaring Twenties seemed secure. Few people thought about what would happen if that confidence ever disappeared. Wealth was surging, cities were sparkling with nightlife, and another powerful force was shaping culture: the rise of the modern celebrity. For the first time in history, millions of people in different countries admired the same famous face. These new icons didn't rule nations or command armies. They appeared on the silver screen. Cinema was becoming one of the most powerful forms of entertainment in the world. Movie theaters began to open in cities and towns, offering audiences a chance to escape everyday life and enter dazzling worlds of romance, adventure, and glamour. In darkened halls, flickering images told larger-than-life stories. Hollywood quickly became the center of this new industry. Huge film studios in California produced movies at astonishing speed. Directors experimented with new techniques, actors perfected dramatic performances, communicating emotion without spoken words. Saxophones weaved playful melodies in the air, pianos played bright chords, calling dancers to the floor. Jazz soon crossed the Atlantic. Paris quickly embraced it. European audiences were fascinated by jazz's vibrant style and emotional freedom. Nightclubs were packed with people. They wanted to hear the latest songs from American bands, which seemed to be playing with the pulse of life. The music changed people's behavior. Where the dance floor had once been slow and careful steps, there was now an explosion of movement. Couples swung, spun, in energetic dances like the Charleston and the Black Bottom. The rhythm encouraged laughter, experimentation, and sometimes reckless enthusiasm. The older generation looked on with concern. To them, jazz seemed chaotic and unruly. The music ignored the traditional structures of a decadent society. Some critics said it promoted moral decline, but young people loved it. To the new generation, jazz was a symbol of freedom, bold, exciting, full of possibility. The music captured the spirit of a decade that refused to live quietly. Jazz-dedicated clubs began to spring up in major cities. Dimly lit rooms, cigarette smoke, and glowing lamps, gathering places for musicians and audiences. Wealthy socialites, artists, writers, curious travelers, all united in the same hypnotic rhythm. Famous performers emerged. Louis Armstrong transformed the trumpet into a voice that soared above the orchestra with joyful confidence. Singers began to deliver lyrics with emotion and personality never heard before. Jazz was not just entertainment, it became the soundtrack to an entire era. The Roaring Twenties danced to its rhythms, celebrated its energy, and spread its bold spirit to every corner of modern life. As jazz spread through the cities of the 1920s, another unexpected feature was shaping nightlife: alcohol. In America, Prohibition was enacted in 1920, a national ban on the manufacture and sale of alcohol. The goal was to create a more disciplined, moral society. Many politicians believed that removing alcohol would reduce crime, strengthen families, and restore order to the city. But the opposite happened. Drinking didn't disappear, it just went underground. In cities like New York and Chicago, secret bars began to spring up behind unmarked doors and hidden basements. They were called speakeasies, where customers had to whisper to avoid police attention. A visitor would walk down a dark alley, knock on an ordinary door. The small window would open, the guard would quietly ask for the password. Inside, nothing secretive, a lively, crowded place. A jazz band was playing energetic songs, guests were dancing in dim lights. The waiter was moving quickly with trays, mixing creative cocktails. With traditional spirits hard to come by, bartenders experimented with new recipes. They mixed gin, fruit juices, and syrups to create colorful drinks, hiding the rough taste of homemade alcohol. Cocktails became fashionable, turning drinking into an art form. The most famous speakeasies became legendary. Some were lavish clubs, hidden behind elegant restaurants. Some were small, smoky rooms where musicians played until sunrise. Wealthy businessmen, artists, socialites, all gathered, enjoying the thrill of breaking the law in stylish surroundings. Of course, the illegal alcohol trade attracted powerful criminals. Figures like Al Capone made huge fortunes supplying liquor. Organized crime expanded rapidly, making alcohol the most profitable business of the decade. But for many, speakeasy was a place to escape from reality. Behind that hidden door, the Roaring Twenties seemed overwhelming. The music played loudly, the cocktails flowed freely, and the night promised endless excitement. Jazz was echoing in the clubs, cocktails were flowing behind hidden doors, then another Revolution Street and dance hall were quietly unfolding. The rise of a new kind of woman. For generations, society has expected women to behave with careful restraint. Fashion was heavy and modest. Hair was long, carefully styled. Social rules dictated how to speak, dress, and behave in public. But the young women of the 1920s had no interest in that tradition. They called themselves flappers. The name itself suggested something light, rebellious, uncontrollable. Flappers rejected the rigid expectations of their parents' generation and embraced a lifestyle full of freedom, excitement, and independence. The change was immediately visible in fashion. Long skirts disappeared, short dresses came so that it was easier to move on the dance floor. Corsets, which restricted movement by holding the waist, were abandoned in favor of loose, comfortable clothing. Hair was cut into a short bob. It was a bold decision, one that shocked many older observers. For centuries, long hair had been a symbol of feminine beauty. Now young women were happily abandoning that tradition. Flappers also behaved differently. They danced enthusiastically to jazz, smoked cigarettes in public, and openly expressed their desire for independence. Many worked in offices, shops, and factories, earning their own income and gaining new personal freedom. This seemed alarming to the older generation. Newspapers published articles about moral decline and rebellious youth. Critics said the flapper lifestyle promoted recklessness and irresponsibility. But the change seemed exhilarating to women. They had been through the world wars, they had worked in factories and offices, while the men had gone off to fight. It seemed impossible to return to the quiet, restricted life of the pre-war period. The flapper symbolized something bigger than just fashion. She symbolized a new era, one where women were demanding a greater voice in society. Voting rights had expanded in many countries, and social expectations were slowly shifting. The Roaring Twenties were not just about jazz, wealth, and glittering parties. They were also about transformation, and the young women dancing on crowded floors were helping to reshape the modern world. Music was filling dance halls, flapper fashion was transforming, then another powerful force was shaping the decade. Money. Wealth was magically multiplying in the 1920s. Business was expanding rapidly. Factories were producing goods at astonishing speed. New industries were springing up overnight. The automobile is at the center of this transformation. Henry Ford's assembly line had transformed manufacturing before the war, but now the system has reached its full potential. Cars are rolling out of factories in huge numbers, becoming affordable to millions of people who had never imagined they would. Roads have expanded into the countryside, connecting town and city more easily than ever before. Travel suddenly seems easy and exciting. Radio entered daily life. Families gathered around glowing wooden cabinets to listen to music, news, and entertainment. Advertisements encouraged people to buy new products, from refrigerators to stylish clothing. Consumption became part of the culture. People were encouraged to spend, to enjoy the rewards of modern industry. Department stores displayed elegant goods in brightly lit windows, tempting shoppers with the promise of comfort and sophistication. But the most powerful symbol of the new prosperity was the stock market. In cities like New York, investors rushed to buy shares of companies which they believed would grow endlessly. Stock prices were rising steadily. Newspapers reported stories of ordinary individuals who had become wealthy quickly by investing small amounts. The idea of easy money spread like wildfire. People who had never invested before suddenly opened brokerage accounts. Clerks, teachers, shopkeepers bought stocks with loans, confident that prices would continue to rise. The market became a national obsession. Crowds gathered outside brokerage offices to watch stock price updates on large boards. Conversations in restaurants and taxis turned to the same subject: which company was climbing the fastest. Many Americans saw a golden opportunity. The economy seemed unstoppable. Factories were producing goods faster. Cities were getting richer. Luxurious lifestyles were becoming common among those benefiting from the boom. But beneath the excitement was a fragile truth. This wealth depended heavily on confidence. As long as people believed that markets would rise forever, the prosperity of the Roaring Twenties seemed secure. Few people thought about what would happen if that confidence ever disappeared. Wealth was surging, cities were sparkling with nightlife, and another powerful force was shaping culture: the rise of the modern celebrity. For the first time in history, millions of people in different countries admired the same famous face. These new icons didn't rule nations or command armies. They appeared on the silver screen. Cinema was becoming one of the most powerful forms of entertainment in the world. Movie theaters began to open in cities and towns, offering audiences a chance to escape everyday life and enter dazzling worlds of romance, adventure, and glamour. In darkened halls, flickering images told larger-than-life stories. Hollywood quickly became the center of this new industry. Huge film studios in California produced movies at astonishing speed. Directors experimented with new techniques, actors perfected dramatic performances, communicating emotion without spoken words. Many films were still silent, but silence did not stop these performers from becoming international stars. Charlie Chaplin, Rudolph Valentino, Clara Bow, these names became instantly recognizable across continents. Their photos appeared in magazines, newspapers, and advertisements. Audiences adored them. Fans studied the actresses' clothing, tried to copy their hairstyles. Young men admired the confident style of movie heroes and imitated their charm and elegance. The influence of films spread quickly. Fashion designers kept an eye on what was seen on screen, knowing that the same styles would soon be in demand in shops and department stores. Hairstyle, makeup, even the way people walked, everything began to reflect the glamorous image of the movies. Hollywood itself became a symbol of luxury. Stories circulated of extravagant parties in the vast mansions of film stars. These gatherings represented the spirit of the Roaring Twenties: wealth, beauty, excitement, endless celebration. But something deeper was going on underneath. Cinema allowed people to share the same dreams. A young factory worker in Chicago would watch the same film with a wealthy businessman in New York or a student in Paris. For a few hours, they would all enter the same world of adventure and romance. The 1920s weren't just an era of jazz and prosperity. It was the beginning of modern entertainment culture. The glittering faces of the silver screen were becoming heroes and icons for an entire generation. In the late 1920s, the world glowed with confidence. Cities sparkled with electric lights. Jazz poured from nightclubs. The stock market soared higher than ever before. It seemed to many that modern society had finally found the secret to endless prosperity. But cracks were beginning to form beneath the glittering surface. The decade's prosperity was not shared equally. Wealthy investors and businessmen were enjoying huge profits, but many farmers in the countryside were struggling quietly. After the First World War, agricultural prices had fallen, leaving farmers in debt and with low incomes. Factories were also producing goods that people could not afford to buy comfortably. Store windows were filled with automobiles, radios, fashionable clothing. but many families bought on installment plans and loans. The culture of easy credit allowed people to buy luxuries immediately, but it also created mountains of debt. The stock market itself was becoming dangerous. Speculation replaced careful investing. People didn't buy shares without understanding the company, they just believed that the price would keep rising. Banks also joined the frenzy. Some financial institutions lent large sums to investors who used the money to buy more stocks. This allowed small savings to control huge investments. As long as the market was rising, the system seemed brilliant, but it was also extremely fragile. If prices fell, investors who had borrowed would have to sell quickly. That rapid sale would have pushed prices down even further, creating a chain reaction that would spread throughout the financial system. Few people wanted to think about that possibility. The parties were too lively, the music too exciting, the profits too tempting. Confidence ruled the decade. Newspapers celebrated the booming economy. Wealthy financiers were on magazine covers, hailed as masters of modern prosperity. Crowds gathered outside brokerage offices to watch stock prices rise. The Roaring Twenties seemed irresistible. But under the champagne, the music, the dazzling lights, the foundation of prosperity was becoming dangerously unstable. In the fall of 1929, the confidence of the Roaring Twenties had peaked. For nearly a decade, prosperity had seemed unstoppable. Cities were brighter. Fortunes multiplied. The stock market soared so high that many believed it would never fall. Investors spoke of the future with absolute certainty. Modern industry and financial genius had created an era of permanent wealth. But confidence was actually very fragile. In late October, the first signs of panic appeared on Wall Street. At first, the change was subtle. Stock prices dipped slightly. A few nervous investors sold to take profits. Normally, such movements would not be noticed. The market always goes up and down, but this time was different. More people started selling. Rumors spread through brokerage offices and trading floors. Investors who had borrowed suddenly realized that falling prices could destroy them financially. They rushed to sell before their losses increased. The result was chaos. Thousands of shares flooded the market at once. Prices dropped rapidly. Within hours, fortunes built up over the years began to disappear. Crowds gathered outside banks and financial buildings in New York. Desperate for news, newspapers printed extra editions describing the dramatic collapse of the stock market. Inside the exchanges, traders were shouting orders, prices plunging faster than they could track. The crash didn't destroy the world overnight, but it shattered the illusion that the prosperity of the 1920s would last forever. Banks began to fail as loans went unpaid. Businesses closed as customers could no longer buy products. Unemployment rose as factory production slowed. The glittering parties that had defined the decade slowly disappeared. The music was still playing in jazz clubs, but the mood had changed. Laughter seemed quieter. The confidence that had existed in every corner of society had faded into uncertainty. Looking back, the Roaring Twenties seem almost dreamlike. For a brief moment, the world believed it was entering an endless golden age of luxury and excitement, an era of wealth and celebration, echoing the overconfidence once seen on ships like the Titanic. But just as that great liner unexpectedly crashed into the cold Atlantic, the decade's dazzling prosperity collided with reality. And when the music ended, a very different era was about to begin. In the ancient world, the education of royal children began long before the child even understood what a throne was. From the moment a prince or princess was born, their life expectations were shaped. They were not just children growing up in a palace. They were future rulers who would one day command armies, judge disputes, negotiate with powerful rivals. Every lesson carried immense weight. Ordinary children learned basic skills from their parents. A farmer's son learned to work in the fields. A craftsman's daughter learned household trades. Their education was practical, centered around survival and daily life. But royal children lived in another world. Their classrooms were palaces, temples, private courtyards. Parents were not alone. Tutors, philosophers, priests, military instructors were carefully chosen by the royal court. Each teacher brought knowledge that would shape the minds of future rulers. Some lessons were in language and literature. Princes learned to read sacred texts, royal decrees, and historical records. Understanding the past was considered essential to governing the future. Other lessons were in politics. Young heirs had to understand alliances, diplomacy, powerful families, and the fragile balance of neighboring kingdoms. One careless decision could start a war or destroy a dynasty. Physical training was equally important. Royal children learned riding, archery, swordsmanship, and strategy. Those primarily destined for leadership also had to understand warfare. It is difficult for a ruler to maintain authority if he cannot command an army. Religion also played a central role. In many ancient cultures, kings were expected to rule with divine approval. Priests taught royal children rituals, sacred traditions, and the complex relationship between the throne and the gods. But the most important lesson was less obvious. Royal children were trained to think. Philosophers encouraged them to question ideas, debate moral dilemmas, and examine the nature of justice and power. The goal was not just knowledge, it was wisdom. Because in the ancient world, the education of a prince or princess was not just about learning facts. It was about preparing a human being to shoulder the enormous burden of ruling others. In some ancient kingdoms, the education of royal children reached a level of extraordinary sophistication. Rulers understood that the future stability of their empire depended on the minds of their children, so they sought out the most brilliant teachers. In ancient Greece, philosophy was considered the highest form of knowledge. Many royal courts invited famous thinkers to guide young princes. These philosophers didn't just teach grammar or math. They were mentors, responsible for shaping the worldview of the future king. The most famous example is in the 4th century BC. Macedonian King Philip II wanted the best possible education for his son Alexander. To do this, he invited one of the greatest philosophers in history to be the prince's tutor. That philosopher was Aristotle. Aristotle was already renowned throughout Greece for his work on logic, science, politics, and ethics. Under his guidance, Alexander studied a remarkable range of subjects: literature, geography, medicine, zoology, philosophy, political theory. Lessons were not always held in formal classrooms. More often, they took place in gardens or on shaded pathways. Aristotle believed that discussion and observation were essential tools for learning. He encouraged Alexander to question and examine ideas, not just memorize. The lasting impact of this teaching style was that Alexander developed a deep admiration for Greek culture, literature, and philosophy. Years later, he would carry copies of Homer's epic poems on his military campaigns and discuss philosophical ideas with his companions. But philosophers also taught moral responsibility. They asked young rulers to ask difficult questions about justice, leadership, and the proper use of power. What makes a ruler legitimate? How should a king treat conquered people? When is war justified? These questions were not theoretical. Princes would soon face such decisions in reality. Philosophers acted as guides to the mind and conscience of future rulers. They hoped their lessons would produce leaders who governed wisely, not simply ruled by force. Of course, history shows that even the best education cannot guarantee a perfect ruler, but the presence of philosophers in royal courts reveals something important about the ancient world. Kings understood that knowledge itself could be the most powerful tool of leadership. Philosophers were shaping the minds of royal children another group was shaping their bodies. In the ancient world, rulers had to understand war. The king, who fought less personally, also had to command the army, organize the defense, and decide the outcome of the battle. For this reason, the physical training of princes began early and continued throughout their youth. Royal education was never limited to books and scrolls. Young knights were taken outside the palace walls to train in riding, archery, and combat. Skilled warriors served as instructors, teaching them how to handle weapons and move confidently on the battlefield. Horseback riding was especially important. From Persia to Macedonia, cavalry played a crucial role in warfare in many ancient civilizations. Princes spent countless hours learning to control powerful horses, guide them through difficult terrain, and carry weapons. Balance, strength, and discipline were essential. Archery is another fundamental skill. The future ruler had to understand the weapons his soldiers used. By practicing with a bow and arrow, royal students developed accuracy and patience, useful in both war and leadership. Swordsmanship training could be intense. Instructors would teach princes how to hold a blade, strike, and defend against opponents. Wooden practice weapons were used at first, but the lessons were serious. Even during training, careless movements could cause injury. But the purpose of this education wasn't just to create skilled fighters. It was to build courage. Ancient societies admired rulers who shared the dangers of soldiers. Kings, who understood the hardships of the battlefield, earned more loyalty than armies. Some royal students enthusiastically embraced this lesson. Alexander of Macedon became an exceptional horseman and warrior in his youth. Everyone knows the story of Alexander's famous horse, Bucephalus. It is said that this horse would not let anyone ride it, except the young Prince Alexander. As a child, Alexander calmed this stubborn horse, stood so that the sun would not shine on his face, and then jumped onto it. This story later became a symbol of his courage and determination. To conquer a stubborn horse meant the ability to overcome any challenge. Military education didn't just stop at physical training. There was strategy too. Young princes would study famous battles of the past, how generals positioned forces, how they planned attacks. They would simulate real campaigns using models of landscapes. Growing up, a royal heir needed to have both intellectual knowledge and physical confidence. Because in the ancient world, ruling a kingdom often meant leading an army, and a king who didn't understand war was easy to lose his throne. While Greek princes studied with philosophers and trained for war, royal education in ancient Egypt took a very different path. In Egypt, knowledge and religion were intertwined. The pharaoh was not just a political ruler. He was considered a divine figure, a living bridge between the gods and the people. Because of this sacred role, the education of royal children often took place in temple complexes under the supervision of powerful priests. These temples were not just places of worship, they were centers of learning. Within the walls, priests preserved ancient texts, astronomical observations, medical knowledge, and sacred rituals passed down for centuries. Access to this teaching was limited to a very select few. The royal child was among them. Sometimes young princes went to the House of Life, an institution connected to the major temple, where scribes and priests studied religion, science, and administration. This school was not open to ordinary Egyptians, it was reserved for the elite. The lessons were complex and demanding. Royal students learned to read and write hieroglyphs, the world's most intricate writing system. They studied sacred myths, accounts of the gods, and the origins of the world. They also learned ritual. The pharaoh had to perform ceremonies to honor the gods and maintain cosmic order. Priests taught the princes precise movements, prayers, and offerings. Astronomy was also an important subject. Egyptian priests observed the stars, calculated the flooding of the Nile, and determined religious festivals. Royal students studied these celestial patterns to understand the rhythm of Egyptian life. Math and administration were also vital. The ruler had to manage land, organize labor, and oversee massive constructions like temples and pyramids. If the ruler understood numbers, measurements, and record-keeping, he could govern effectively. But much of this education was secret. Priests guarded certain religious teachings closely, sharing them only with trusted initiates. Royal children who attended temple schools received knowledge that reinforced their sacred authority. By learning this hidden tradition, future pharaohs not only received an education, they inherited the spiritual legitimacy of the entire Egyptian kingdom. While Egypt trained royal children in sacred temples, the Persian Empire developed its own remarkable system. The Persians believed that a ruler's character was as important as knowledge. To govern a vast empire stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia, a king needed discipline, honesty, courage, and self-control. These qualities did not come naturally. They had to be carefully taught in childhood. The Greek historian Herodotus describes the education of Persian noble boys. From about the age of 5 to 20, the sons of the Persian elite attended royal military schools. These schools were not luxurious palaces, not filled with comfort. Rather, they were places to build strength and character. The lesson was surprisingly simple. According to Persian tradition, young nobles were taught 3 essential skills: horse riding, archery, and speaking the truth. Horse riding was vital because the Persian Empire relied heavily on cavalry. Royal children learned to ride on open plains and rugged landscapes, developing confidence and physical endurance. Archery training was right behind him. The bow was the most important weapon in Persian warfare. Princes would practice shooting at distant targets, learning patience and precision, which their soldiers would use in battle. But the most interesting lesson was honesty. Truthfulness was highly valued in Persian culture. Lying was considered the most shameful behavior. Royal children were therefore trained to tell the truth and keep their promises, essential qualities for a trustworthy ruler. Education also included moral instruction in Zoroastrian beliefs. Teachers would talk about the struggle between truth and falsehood, good and evil. The future king was supposed to protect justice and resist corruption to maintain order in the empire. Physical endurance was also a priority. Young nobles sometimes trained outdoors in harsh conditions, long-distance rides, hunting, practicing survival in harsh environments. These prepared them for leadership and the rigors of war. Unlike the philosophical education of Greece or the priestly instruction of Egypt, Persian royal education focused heavily on character. The goal was to produce brave, disciplined, morally strong rulers. Because in an empire spanning thousands of miles, the personal character of a king could decide the fate of millions of people. As the ancient Mediterranean world changed, the Romans developed their own approach to educating the children of powerful families. Education in Rome was closely connected to politics. The Roman Republic and later, the empire depended on leaders who could speak persuasively, command respect, and navigate the complex world of alliances and rivalries between the Senate and the army. That's why the education of elite Roman children focused heavily on rhetoric. Rhetoric was the art of public speaking. Young nobles learned countless hours structuring arguments, persuading audiences, and delivering speeches, all of which could sway political decisions. Skilled speakers could win elections, defend themselves in court, and inspire soldiers before battle. Teachers would guide this lesson under the name of rhetoric. Students would practice debating historical events or imaginary legal cases. They would learn how to structure arguments, control their tone of voice, and present confidently in front of an audience. This training was essential for the sons of powerful Roman families. Roman politics was ruthless. Senators competed fiercely for influence and prestige. It was difficult for a man who could not speak effectively in public to advance his career. Roman education also included literature. Students studied the works of famous poets and historians like Homer, Virgil, and Livy. From these texts, they learned language, history, and moral examples, which were believed to shape character. Sometimes philosophy was also included. The Stoic philosopher Seneca later became the tutor of the young Emperor Nero. Seneca sought to guide the future ruler toward wisdom and restraint through philosophical teachings of virtue and self-control. Fortunately, the results were mixed. Nero later became infamous for his cruelty and excesses, a reminder that even the best teachers cannot always shape the character of a powerful ruler. Yet Roman education was influential. Young nobles trained physically through sports, riding, and military exercises. Like their Greek and Persian counterparts, they also had to understand warfare and leadership. A wide range of abilities were expected of Roman aristocrats by the time they reached adulthood. Reading history, debating ideas, commanding soldiers, speaking confidently before the Senate. Because in Rome, power didn't just belong to the strong, power belonged to those who could make others follow them. As royal children reached adolescence, their education expanded beyond philosophy, religion, and warfare. They had to learn something equally important: how to survive in the royal court. The ancient court was a complex environment: powerful families, ambitious advisors, rival factions competing for influence. A young prince or princess had to understand this delicate world long before inheriting authority. Mistakes could be fatal. Royal tutors would introduce lessons in diplomacy. Students would learn how alliances are formed within kingdoms, how marriage strengthens political ties, and how carefully chosen wards can prevent conflict from escalating into war. Conversation itself became a skill. Future rulers practiced speaking respectfully to powerful nobles, but maintaining authority. They learned how to listen carefully, observe hidden motives, respond without showing too much of their own intention. These lessons often took place at real court gatherings. Royal children would observe discussions between diplomats, ambassadors, and advisors. They would gradually learn the subtle rules of political interaction by watching experienced leaders negotiate treaties or resolve disputes. Court etiquette was equally important. The prince had to know how to behave at public ceremonies, how to greet foreign envoys, how to show generosity but not appear weak. It was all there. Every gesture had a meaning. Body language mattered too. Standing too proudly could seem arrogant. Looking too humble could signal weakness. Tutors therefore coached carefully, understanding the balance between projecting confidence and authority. Marriage diplomacy also became a part of education. Royal children knew that their future marriages could be arranged to strengthen alliances within the kingdom. So they learned foreign languages, cultural customs, and traditions of neighboring states. Understanding other cultures helped prevent misunderstandings that could otherwise lead to conflict. But the most difficult lesson was trust. The royal court was famous for intrigue. Advisors could secretly pursue their own ambitions. Relatives sometimes competed for the throne. Young heirs had to learn who to trust, who to watch carefully. This education prepared them for the harsh realities of life. Ruling a kingdom required more than intelligence or courage. Ambition, loyalty, and the ability to navigate a world of deception. And for the future monarch, Mustang court politics was often the difference between survival and disaster. As royal students grew up, their education centered on knowledge of the wider world. Future rulers could not remain ignorant of ideas about distant lands, rival kingdoms, and foreign cultures. Understanding the geography, history, and traditions of other civilizations was considered essential preparation for leadership. That's why many royal courts developed impressive libraries. These collections weren't just displays of decorative scrolls and manuscripts. They were repositories of knowledge gathered from across the ancient world. History, philosophical writings, religious texts, medical treatises, poetry, they filled the shelves. Royal students would spend long hours studying this material. In ancient Greece and later the Hellenistic kingdom, Homer's epic poems were read, stories of heroes, wars, and moral choices. They were not just for entertainment, they were lessons in courage, loyalty, and leadership. In other regions, similar texts shaped royal thinking. Persian princes read the records of previous kings and the traditions of the empire. Egyptian priests learned sacred writing, the duty of the pharaoh, and the responsibility of maintaining harmony between the gods and humanity. Libraries also introduced geography. Maps and travel accounts described distant territories, unfamiliar peoples, and trade routes. This knowledge helped future rulers understand the political landscape beyond their borders. Diplomacy often depended on such awareness. A king who understood the culture and ambitions of neighboring states could negotiate more effectively and avoid unnecessary conflict. Some royal courts became famous centers of learning. The Library of Alexandria, founded in the Hellenistic period, attempted to gather all the books of the ancient world. Scholars from many lands would come there to study and exchange ideas. Royal patrons supported these scholars because knowledge itself strengthened political authority. Access to such resources was a privilege for royal students. They were encouraged to debate ideas with their tutors, analyze historical events, and consider how past rulers had succeeded or failed. In the process, education went beyond simple instruction to become an exploration of the human experience. By reading about distant lands, ancient battles, and philosophical arguments, future rulers would develop the intellectual tools they would need to understand the complex world they would soon govern. For in the ancient world, knowledge was not just an ornament to power, it was its foundation. In the end, every royal education reaches the same moment, when lessons end and real power begins. Years of studying philosophy, religion, diplomacy, warfare. Tutors guide thought, priests explain sacred traditions, generals train in the realities of battle. But none of these lessons matter until young heir steps into the world of leadership. The final stage of royal education was experience. Before inheriting the throne, many princes were gradually introduced to the responsibilities of governance. They attended council meetings, listened to advisors debate policy, and observed how their parents made decisions that affected the entire kingdom. Sometimes small tasks were given. Young princes were asked to oversee minor administrative duties, settle disputes with local officials, or go to negotiations with diplomats in neighboring states. This responsibility allowed them to practice ruling under the guidance of an experienced mentor. Military leadership was also part of this final training. Some princes would join seasoned commanders on military campaigns. They would see how armies moved, how strategies were formed, and how discipline was maintained among soldiers. In some cases, princes were given command of small units to inspire loyalty under pressure and test their decision-making. The results could shape their reputations for a lifetime. Alexander of Macedon, as a young prince, first demonstrated leadership in battle by commanding cavalry. His success earned him the admiration of experienced soldiers and strengthened his claim to authority long before he became king. But not all royal students passed this test. There are many examples in history, those who received excellent education but failed to govern wisely, some due to lack of discipline, some due to ignoring the moral lessons of their tutors. Power reveals both the strength and weakness of a person's character. For those who were successful, royal education achieved its purpose. It produced leaders who could navigate the complex and often dangerous world of war, diplomacy, religion, and politics. In ancient societies where the fate of a nation rested in the hands of a ruler, education was never taken lightly. It was a careful preparation for the enormous responsibility of power in a human mind. And when a prince finally ascended the throne, every lesson of childhood shaped his subsequent decisions.